In this video, I'm going to show you how to place your parking brake shoes on this Ford F-150. Make sure you have the right ones for your truck. We are working on the 09 to 2011 early half of this generation, so if you have a 12 to 14, you will need different parking brake shoes because Ford used two different differentials in this. Having said that, let's get started. Use your 21mm socket, remove all 6 of your lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. Use a 10mm wrench or socket, break free this slider pin bolt. With this one broken free, let's move to the top one. Break this free now while the caliper is still securely mounted. This one has a vibration damper attached to it, which actually will help because it gives us something to grab onto. So remove this completely. We'll set it aside. Pull this back, leave it right here. Remove the bottom one the rest of the way. You can take this one out completely because it has enough space. With the help of a pry bar, let's pry this caliper piston in a little bit, just like this. Not all the way, just enough to get this caliper off of here. When you pry this off, pry from the bottom, this pad is stuck, so it's going to have to unseize. Basically, both pads need to swing up and out in order for this caliper to come out of here. There we go, just like that. Now you can swing it, unhook it from the top, and there we go. You can flip it over. We'll pull this bolt slider pin out and then set this up on the leaf spring. Basically, what you're aiming for is to not put any pressure on this brake hose, so don't just let it dangle. Let's remove the pads. On the inner one, you can just pull straight out. It should pop out. It's clipped in with these little hooks. And then to remove this pad, the outer one, you can either pry on this. However, sometimes this is difficult because you're basically prying up against yourself. So what I'm going to do is flip this over, and I'm just going to use a hammer, tap on these two ears, and it'll slide the pad straight out. There we go. Set this aside. Now let's take off the rotor. Usually you can just wiggle it back and forth. If it does not let you pull it off, either it's seized onto the hub surface of the axle or the parking brake shoes are grabbing it and don't let you pull it off. If you think it's seized onto the hub, you can use these two bolt holes and stick 2 bolts through, pull this away. If you think it's the parking brake shoes, I will show you in a second where you can contract them, de-adjust them so you can have them release the brake rotor. For me, it comes right off as it should. If you look on the bottom here, now with the rotor off, this right here is the adjuster. You're going to use a screwdriver or a little pry bar. Come in from the back side, there's going to be a hole, and you can adjust the e-brake shoes inward to release the rotor, which is exactly what I was talking about. So if you think these are grabbing on too tight, you can release them before you pull off the rotor so you can pull off the rotor. With a screwdriver, I'm going to turn this in, well, from my direction upwards. If you're going from the back side, it would be down. But basically what I'm trying to do is remove pressure off of these shoes. As I remove pressure, it'll make it easier for me to remove these springs. I'm just going to go all the way or until this adjuster is no longer applying pressure to both ends. You can use a screwdriver or a little pry bar to do this, whatever works best for you. Also, I have, this is coated in oil for me. There's an axle seal leak, which of course we are addressing, but this is making it so that, for me, this turns very easily. Often, if these are not serviced properly, they get rusty. So what you can do in that case is spray it with some rust penetrant, work it back and forth, and hopefully you can free it up. To remove this spring, I'm going to pry it away from the shoes just a little bit, and there are multiple ways of doing this. I like to use some locking pliers. These seem to be a little too large, so I'm going to use my smaller ones. Needle nose locking pliers work great for this because you can clip them on nice and tight, and then pull on the spring, pry it right off of here. When you remove it, make sure that you note which direction it goes in. This one is symmetrical on both ends, so it doesn't matter which way you put it back. Now you can pull out on the two shoes, remove the adjuster. We'll obviously clean this up thoroughly, set it aside. Now for the top spring, same theory. I'm going to pry it away, clip it with my needle nose locking pliers, and hopefully it works out. Sometimes they're a little stiff. There we go. Pull it out and away. Now you can unclip it from the other side, or unhook it, I should say. There it is. It's symmetrical, just like the bottom one. Now with it unhooked, just pull it away and set it aside. Now let's unclip these retainers. The easiest way to do this is to just pry this in. Try to have the retainer stay. Push the clip down. Oh, there we go. That comes right off. You can take this out. Remove the parking brake shoe. Remove your pin. Well, through the back side. There we go. And then we'll do the same to the other side. And on the other side, same deal. Try to pry this down. Clip up. There we go. Take this out. Take the shoe off. Take the pin out. Let's put some grease on all the contact points of the parking brake shoes. I'm going to start up here. If needed, you can clean this up more. For me, this is the best it's going to get. You can use a wire brush. I know this lever is not complete yet. There's a missing piece. I will put that in later. It's going to be easiest to do that because it keeps falling apart on me. So I'm also going to put some grease here and over here. You'll see raised areas everywhere where the shoes contact. So that's how you'll know. So 3 spots on the backing shield here at the top, and then we'll do the same exact thing on the other side. Then we can put the shoes on. I'm going to put the pin through the back side, just like this. I'm actually going to take a large C-clamp and just clamp this shoe on. So, okay, doesn't have to be perfect, but it's holding it, and that's what matters. Now, while holding the pin from the back side, slide this locking clip over. I like to take a pry bar and line it up. Press it through. If you can spin the pin from the back side, go ahead. If not, you can grab it with some needle nose pliers, very gently twist it as you push this in, but a lot of times that gets complicated because not only could you rip the head off of this pin, but it could also just spin the whole thing over and over and over without actually turning just the pin and locking it in. So try your best to put pressure just on the side of this without slipping, of course, and then from the back side, slowly turn the pin until it locks in. And do the same to the other side shoe. The only difference on this side is because it doesn't have a deeper hole for the pin, you can most likely just hold it on like this as you're trying to get it on, so no need for a C-clamp. There we go. Take this piece and to put it in, now of course yours should actually stay attached, but if it doesn't, clean it up, just wire brush it. Mine was somewhat clean. It's never going to look perfect again, but basically that large pin right there slides in up top, and then these shoes are supposed to slide over. Okay, that shoe is in. Now let's get that top spring in. I have a C-clamp holding this shoe on just because it's going to keep moving around and falling off. Make sure you hook it right on that round hole over there. Then, just like for removal, I'm going to put my locking pliers nice and tight on this, grab it, and hook it right on. Okay, release it. It's not completely in, so be careful. Put your pry bar up against it and tap it in. There we go. Make sure it's seated, which it is. Now let's take care of the adjuster before we put it in. Of course I have a new one, even though my old one was in good condition, but I got a new hardware kit, comes with the adjuster, so that's great. You do have to lubricate it, so pull this end off and I'm going to add some of the provided grease, which happens to be white lithium grease, but you could just use brake grease if that's what you have. And if your old one is seized and in poor condition, replace it or unseize it and lubricate it enough to where it'll function properly. I'm going to put a bunch of this grease on the threads, and then I'm going to use the adjuster part of it, the threaded gear here, to work that grease into the threads. It's important that it gets kind of all over the threads so that it does not seize in the future. I'm going to bring it all the way down, then add some grease up top here where there isn't any, and then bring it back up. And that should be all set. There we go. You don't need a whole lot of this. You just need to coat it and then let the threaded part do its job and kind of work the grease in there. I'm going to put the extra grease on the bottom here so that it can have a little reserve, kind of. Slide it through, and then take the adjuster. We'll slide it in here. It doesn't really matter which direction you put it in. If you want to put it in the same exact direction as before, for me, I actually think it was this way, so I'm going to do that. But they're not self-adjustable like rear drum brakes, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, now that this is in, let's put the spring in so that this holds it together. To put the spring on, I grab it with locking pliers, hook it on one end, bring it over, hook it on the other end. This is a very weak spring. And there you have it. That's installed. Now it is time to adjust these parking brake shoes, but not until the rotor goes on, so that we know how far to get them. And you don't have to get them perfect with the rotor on, because right behind here there's that hole, which, by the way, my kit for the hardware came with a new cover. It's very important that you put that back so water doesn't make its way in. I'm going to put this plug in from the back side. If needed, I can take it back out to adjust the parking brake later. For now, I can do it through here as I'm putting the rotor on. Before I coat the hub in anti-seize, I'm going to put the rotor on just so I can make sure the parking brake shoes are properly adjusted. Actually, that feels pretty good to me. They're barely touching, and there's minimal drag. They're close, so I'm actually just going to leave them as is. If you had to adjust them, you would just go down underneath at the adjuster and either bring them out or in. For me, these are brand new shoes, so at the maximum in point, they are perfectly adjusted. It just so happens, so that's great. If you have to clean up this hub, use a wire brush, scrape it. Mine is not too bad of condition. I'm just going to scrape off some of the old grease or anti-seize, whatever this is, but it's hardened at this point. Just going to do this, and a little bit of brake parts cleaner at the end. Then we can recoat it so that it doesn't rust in the future and the rotor doesn't seize on. That's the main reason for this. If yours is rotted and you have to sand it down, be very careful when you do that, because you don't want to remove so much material that you damage the surface. You still want the rotor to sit flush. Rinse it off. Dry it off. And now, let's put a thin coating of anti-seize. I'm using the spray kind, so I'm going to make sure I don't spray it all over the parking brake shoes. If you're using the brushed kind, that's actually better in this case, because it's a more controlled application. Try to avoid getting it on the lug studs, mainly on the hub surface of the axle. Take a pry bar, pop these shims off. There we go. And do the same to the top one. Sometimes they're a little rusty here, that's why it's important to clean this up very well. However, when you clean it, don't sand too much. If you sand too much, you need a new backing plate, because this is not just the caliper bracket, or, well, the area where the pads slide, but it's also the backing plate. So if you sand too much, you remove too much material. Now those shims are floating, not good. So you just want to clean it up lightly. I'm going to start with a wire brush. If that is not enough, then I will very gently sand or use a file, but you don't want to just grind it down. I'm going to wet this down with some brake parts cleaner to prevent the dust. Okay, if I hammer it down, it'll go down. It looks like I do have to sand just a little bit. So I'm going to grab a very fine, worn sanding disc and just clean up the outer part of it, just a little skim, and that should be good. I'm happy with this. Let's put some grease on so that it hopefully slows the rust down a little bit. It's all right if you put too much, it'll just squeeze out, and then you can wipe it off. Now, put this new shim on, tap it down. That's perfect. Let's do the same to the top one. Now let's put the rotor on. I like to start by putting it on backwards just so the axle can hold it for me while I clean it. It's important to degrease this surface. I'm going to use brake parts cleaner on the inside too, where the brake shoes ride, and wipe it down. Now this one particularly does not have an oil coating, it has a different special coating to prevent rust. However, there are rotors that have Cosmoline oil from the factory to prevent them from rusting while they're on the shelf. Those you absolutely have to clean off, otherwise you get oil all over your brake pads. Slide it down all the way, clean this side. This is what the inner pad looks like. It has the 3 tabs that'll lock into the inside of the piston. Sometimes these are a little tricky to get in. You have to line it up and press it in. There we go. So that's locked in. The outer pad hooks on with these 2 tabs, just like so. It should slide on. Okay, make sure that's flush right here. It's pushed in all the way. Before you install the caliper, put the top bolt in because there won't be enough clearance with the leaf spring. Now, as you slide the caliper on, notice how the outer pad has 2 hooks at the top here. The inner does not, so that doesn't really matter. But at the bottom, the outer one has a spring that has to seat it down all the way, just like that. If it doesn't go on, make sure you're not crushing the boots and the slider pins here. Start these 2 bolts in. That one's snug. Get this one started. I cannot torque this top one just because of, well, this, so I'm going to take a wrench to it, make sure it's tight. I will come back and torque this one though. 22 foot-pounds is the torque for both of these. There's one. On this damper on the backside, if you pop the cap open, you can see that you can fit a T30 socket. However, the clearance between this and the leaf spring is preventing me from putting a torque wrench on here. So even with this, I still can't torque it. So what I'm going to do is close this up. The torque for these is not high enough to where I can't properly tighten it up with a wrench. So I'm just going to give it the best I can with the wrench, and there you have it. That's tight. If you doubt it, you can always put thread locker on the end of these bolts, but it's not absolutely necessary. Let's get the wheel on. Put on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 150 foot-pounds and a cross pattern. $150 in a cross pattern. Here we go. Double check them if you want. If not, take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.